The Thursday, October 17th meeting of the Charter Revision Commission to order. We do not have the minutes of the October 10th meeting yet. It was a quick turnover, so we'll be looking at those at our next meeting. And we're going to start with old business. Last meeting, we were talking about representative town meeting, open town meeting, Australian ballot, and we want to continue that conversation this evening. One of the things that we had talked about, the town attorney Bob Fisher is here to fill us in on the idea of, do we bring the idea of, say we want to go to open town meeting or we want to go to Australian ballot, whatever we want to do we want to bring that to a townwide vote? If we do want to bring it to a townwide vote, how would we do it? What would that mean? And all of those details. And Bob said last week that he will come and talk to us about that tonight, so he is here. And I will let you
jump right in.
The whole thing, yeah.
So last week when we talked about that, I came into it with the understanding that if you were going to try to have a vote by the voters at large on whether to keep or to rescind representative town meeting, that would go the route of the second option for amending your charter by going to the select board, having the select board adopt that as an amendment, which then would be voted upon by all the voters of the town, okay? That would be a binding vote. Then the question came up, well, we thought we would just float it out there as an advisory vote. So I looked at other precedent there. The select board has the authority to warn a meeting, whether it's a regular March, first Tuesday in March, or a special meeting, but a meeting or an election to have an advisory vote. All right, so they have the legal authority to do that. So if that's the route you want to take, you're going to need to talk to the select board about that, get the select board on board as to whether they think it should be advisory, and then the select board will make its decision. Here, I want to play out what happens if you go that advisory route, because I see problems with it down the road. Assume you go the advisory route and the voters say, get rid of representative town meeting. So that's the advice that the voters have given. Where do you go from there? So two things can then happen in my view. One, the select board says, well, that's the advice, so we're going to now adopt a charter amendment that says no representative town meeting. We're going to rescind it. We'll do that formally, and we'll put it back to the voters as a whole as a binding vote this time. That's one option. The other option is the select board says to the Charter Revision Commission and says, well, there you've got your advice. Now you go forward and bring your proposed revisions through subsection D of the article on amendment, which then goes, so you adopt your proposals for amendments, and then that goes to representative town meeting, and it would be voted on there. That, and then you always have the ability there, pursuant to the referendum section, to take an action there if there are the requisite votes for a referendum to go to the voters at large. So those are the two avenues of getting it to be a binding vote. But if you do the advisory, I guess if that's going to be where you end up, why not make that decision now? Because you're waiting really until March through June for that decision. If you're going to say, if the commission says, let's let's rescind representative town meeting, then make that a recommendation, go through, and it'll be voted upon by representative town meeting, and if it's important enough, there'll be a referendum to take it to the voters. Or just give it to the select board and say, if you want to make this a binding vote, make it a binding vote. Seems either one of those, in my opinion, it has more immediate effect and in terms of getting your answers. But legally speaking, I'll back up. The select board does have the authority to warn what is an advisory vote.
Yeah, Maya.
I've been thinking about this a lot since the last meeting, and I think what you just said is a big help to me. I will say, and he's not here tonight, but I don't often agree with everything Spoon says, but I think he had some good points. Oh, here he is, at the last meeting. I'm just talking about you, Spoon. I worry about having an advisory vote in March, because that, one, we'd have to do, the commission would be, I won't say sidetracked, but we would be put in a position where we would have to do a lot of work, a big publicity blitz, getting people to write pro and con articles in the Commons and in the Reformer. We would have, and then, depending upon the vote in March, would we have time to do whatever revisions came out of the vote before we had a special RTM in October, say, in time for us to present the charter to the legislature in December. So I kind of worried about, I wasn't, Spoon talked about if we would have a big explosion, or I don't know the word you used, but I'm not, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the time frame, and I'm worried about the amount of work it would take to pull off an advisory vote. If I have to say, I don't think we as a group have done a very good job in publicizing what we're doing. I mean, it's just, other than the people that we maybe talk to, and there are some people that may watch us on BCTV, but we've had very few people come to our meetings. You know, you know, I've tried putting stuff on Facebook and nobody comes anyway. And so I'm really worried about whether we could pull off an advisory vote. That's my opinion.
If I could just add one more thing, if the select board took it and put it as a binding vote, and you had a vote on that, the next step pursuant to the charter amendment process would be the legislature. That doesn't necessarily need to be done before the end of the 2025, May, June, July timeframe. If you had that binding vote, and for argument's sake, let's say it said rescind representative town meeting, your commission could keep going with that known as far as that's the will of the voters to make other recommendations that would go to a special town meeting in the October timeframe in order to get it passed by the legislature that next winter. Just trying to factor in the legislative cycle on that.
If we made it a binding vote, we would have the same issue of publicity and trying to get people to come and understand what the issue was, on both sides of the issue, both pro and con. And again, I'm not sure that we have the capacity to pull that off.
I understand that it's complicated, but I think that if we were to move forward without knowing, like having gauging whether or not that this could succeed, like if we were to just present a whole charter, say, doing away with RTM and going to a regular open town meeting, and it got voted down, then we would be in the same position. Like we'd be stuck with this charter for another 10 years, or we'd have to keep working, or it seems like we need some sense of whether or not this can succeed before we go through the exercise, because it seems pretty clear that we either need to get rid of RTM or make some adjustments to it. Like it's not working in the state it is now. Something needs to change. And it doesn't make sense to go in one direction if it's just gonna get voted down.
What other commissions have done is produced a charter with revisions and then held community meetings, which, with a draft. And then gone back after those meetings and made whatever changes people seem to be interested in. And I don't know whether that's better than having a townwide vote. I don't know. But they published the draft in entirety, remember, in the Reformer.
Historically, if I may, that's been done differently by charter review commissions at different times. So more recently, it went through all of the public meetings of a charter revision recommendation, having those public hearings and going through representative town meeting. I want to, it's not maybe 2 times ago, but back, it's now probably 25 years ago. I hate to think I can remember that far. But like when it was Dart Everett, Dave Gibson, Becky Day, that charter, they came up with their recommendations and said, we're just going to give it to the select board and see what the select board wants to do with it. The select board then put it out there and it went to the vote. And that's the difference, that's the fork in the road. If you go that route, it goes to the voters at large. It doesn't go through representative town meeting. And are there politics involved there? Sure, but you have control of that at this point because it's your committee.
Yeah, I think the last 2 or 3 commissions had public meetings, if I recall. Do you remember?
Oh, I think they all did. I think they did.
Yeah, I think they all had public meetings.
Yeah, nobody showed up. Remember, there were like 10 people that showed
Well, that
up
was
these
1
days.
year.
Yeah.
David.
Oh, David. David wants to say something after.
Go ahead. Defer to
No.
Mr. Elwood. Okay.
Oh, and David, say who you are for Jessica and the world.
David Lombok, District 9, and a partisan of RTM. A couple thoughts. Number one, I think if you do an advisory vote, you're not going to get the same participation as if it were a binding vote. Because I think people will interpret advisory as, well, they're kind of asking our opinion as opposed to we're going to decide that. The other question I've been thinking about for a little while is, and there's a third thing I have to say, which is not so nice. But the second thing is, this would be more work for you, but to present to RTM or the select board, 2 draft sections, one calling for open town meeting, the other one calling for representative town meeting. Because it seems to me a lot of the other issues you've talked about, like how many signatures you need on a petition or whether it can be done simply by affidavit and so forth, are, to my mind, relatively less critical and less potentially significant. But I think in this case, if you provide 2 alternative sections, then you can have, a real kind of decision. And the third thing I'll say, this is the not so nice thing, and I don't mean to offend anyone or complain about all of your actions, but I have to agree with Maya. The publicity about what you're doing is not reaching people to the extent to which there is publicity. And so I think something needs to be done to provoke an article in the Commons and the Reformer that you're looking at 3 alternative ways of making decisions really needs to be done, because I don't think this is hitting anyone's radar. Thanks.
I guess I want to speak to what we've been talking about, but I want to offer a clear opinion first, because there's been, I recall in last week's meeting, there was a suggestion that we have our minds made up and we want to do away with RTM. That's definitely not true for me, and I don't believe it's true for us. So I want to lay my cards really clearly on the table of what I'm thinking about in terms of these 3 separate options, and then offer a couple of comments about the process that we're trying to decide upon. I've got no interest whatsoever in Australian ballot. I think that would be a mistake. I think that's bad for democracy. I think it's bad for the community. So for me, I'm wrestling between, an RTM that in a variety of different ways and over a pretty long period of time now, coming from different parts of the community, we've heard strong complaints that it's broken, that there's aspects of RTM that are not functioning well for the community. And so I'm wrestling with, is it a fixed RTM path we want to follow, or is it appropriate to switch back at this point after having had good years with RTM and less good years with RTM to having open town meeting? And it's from that perspective that I was looking forward to, I guess I'll say, am still, if we find a way to do it responsibly, am still looking forward to having a town vote on this binary question of open meeting versus RTM. Because there's been plenty of discussion in the community. The community, many people in the community have an opinion on this question. And I think if we hold meetings to discuss this, we're going to hear from fewer people. We're going to get the input from fewer people than even an election with not that great of a turnout. We have been planning to do this at the March election, at least in part. I mean, we've been doing that out of that's a logical thing to do, but also people will be showing up, people who care about town business will be showing up to vote for town officers that day. And I think that, it may only be 20% of the voters that show up. It may not be what we would get for a presidential election, for instance, but it's the people who show up to participate in town government in that way that we offer to the voters. And as I sit here right now, I'd still like to hear from them on the first Tuesday in March to give us some guidance, preferably non-binding, preferably informative, that we can then work with as we complete our work in the months that follow.
I just want to build up what Peter's saying. I think that the feedback we've gotten from the community and the consensus has been that nobody wants Australian ballot. And I know that we're just looking at all of these options as a way to sort of analyze if there are any pros or cons to doing it one way versus another. But I think that that's been a pretty clear message that we've gotten is that there's not a lot of interest in the Australian ballot. People like having the debate, they like having a meeting. It's just a matter of how that meeting gets done. And I think it's not as simple as just, is there a provision that there's open town meeting versus RTM, because it affects the whole charter. It's not like something where we can just present two options. And I think that even if we haven't gotten a lot of publicity, if you find out that there's a vote and it's not a special election, it's like an election you were maybe gonna go to already, and it's out there that there's gonna be this advisory vote, that's gonna get publicity. That is gonna get buzz, because that is a big change. And, knowing that it's on the ballot is gonna just, get it out there in a way that we can't get it out there. Like, if people aren't interested in being involved in these town committees and town government, they're not going to know what we're doing, and they're not gonna care. But if it's on the ballot, that's a little bit different.
Can I have one more comment too
Okay.
about the publicity question, because I appreciate that, and had meant to comment on what you were saying about getting people to write pros and cons. I think there is a task for us. I don't think we are without some additional burden and responsibility if we decide to go for a townwide vote. Because I think it's our job to frame that question, to explain to the community why we're asking them to vote on it. And so there's some work for us to do there to decide what is it, how do we present that? And I like the idea that we would at least, push it out into the two newspapers, but how else can we get, broader than that out into the community? So, and the town now has a communications arm that we didn't have in years past, and so that I think there's some help we can get with that. I don't think that it's that heavy a lift for us, and maybe I'm being naive here, but I don't think it's our job to get, in fact, I think for the 6 of us in particular, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to generate people writing pro articles and people writing con articles. And I think that'll happen because I think there are enough people in the community that are enough interested in this issue that if we follow this path, there will be people who will write such articles. But that ought to happen either more organically or organized by people who want to do the political organizing around it. But I do think, I agree with you that there is a burden for us to put the question out there in with more substance than just putting it on the ballot.
Oh, Spoon, sorry.
If you have a feeling that there's this notion that there's a hidden agenda that's persisting, it's because it does feel like there's a hidden agenda, because I haven't seen anything yet clearly enumerating or describing or any text about why this is an issue. There was no paper sort of opinion that said, here is a list of all the concerns that we have had from people. Here is some that weigh heavier, and for these reasons, we are considering these actions. And so without that, everything seems hidden. Why is this happening? The second thing is you talk about being able to get through. In this era of electronics, it should be pretty easy and obvious. One way is to, after a meeting, write your own summary of the important points and email it to the entire town. We have, or at least at the very least, RTM, which is most of the active town. And so it is possible to be doing things like this, to have forums. That's one of the things we did at the last rendition of this. We had some forums that were very well attended, and at which we listed all the things we would probably be proposing, along with an explanation for each and every one of them. So there's plenty of things you can do if you want to see the public more informed, which is essential if we're going to get an informed decision.
The reason we're talking about this, one, because it's the huge part of our charter is how we govern ourselves. But we've been having meetings, I don't know if it started in July or whatever it was. And we had a whole bunch of people come in and give us their comments and feedback about RTM. And we have this list, which was included in the information for this meeting. And it was actually included in the information for a previous meeting.
Right.
So that's why we're talking about it, because
Copies here.
it was a natural thing to talk about when we were going through the charter, but it was people in the public coming to us and giving us their concerns about RTM.
And in fact, this is the fourth time. We did intentionally, understanding the magnitude of this one issue, especially for people in the community compared to some of the things that are more granular and wonky, that we're interested in, that are necessary to be in a charter, but maybe of less interest to the broad public. On this very question, we held 2 of those meetings where we asked for people to come out and tell us what you think about town meeting. And then this is the second night, a week ago tonight and tonight, that we've been wrestling with where does this leave us and where do we go from here. So we have the list of concerns that have been raised, and it has been, I think you spoke to 2 separate things, Spoon, a few minutes ago, and I think valid concerns have been raised now from the dais and from the audience around broader communication issues and how do we raise our profile in the community. I think that's fair, and I think that's different. That's a separate question. But on the question of are we being thorough and do we have reason to be considering significant changes, that's been transparent and probably the deepest dive of any one particular issue that we've done, and appropriately so, because it's about the annual meeting where the public gets its chance to make the big decisions.
That was it.
I might add that I went online and I found the agenda for this meeting. I did not see attached materials.
Part of what I just gave you.
Well, now I got them when I walked in.
Well, I'm sorry, I did request that they be attached, that they be posted. And
We'll get them, we'll have it.
I
Millicent,
hope
tell
I'm
me.
not just like reiterating what's already being
Oh,
stated.
no, but say your name for the rest
Millicent?
of the world.
Millicent Cooley. And I'm sorry, I hope I'm not gonna be repeating what anybody else said. I have been trying to follow this, I haven't been to every meeting. I read I requested the note, the backup, all with the reasons from Maya. I also don't feel like I've got a full grasp of all the reasons why these 2 things could be proposed. And I would like to hear more debate, like what are the implications for various things of one decision or the other? Not just what did people say, we need to know that, what did people say, what are all the reasons, pros and cons, and what are the implications down the line for the future for each of these things? A detail, just because it's, like what happens to the finance, how does a finance committee get voted, and it's a lot of different things. So it's laid out, so I would be also in favor of a deeper kind of proposal, like in both directions, and it might make public articles and opinions more useful in response.
What we did, it feels like it was a month ago, but it was literally a week ago. Today, or a week ago today, is, and if I have not had a chance to go and type it up nicely, so that's gonna be for the next meeting, we'll have it. We actually, and I can send you what we did, Millicent, and for anybody else. We went through, we have a chart, and we went through what RTM currently does. And then we have a thing that says, can it be accomplished by an open town meeting? Can that be accomplished through Australian ballot? And is there another way to accomplish it? So with the help of Bob Fisher, we went through this again, it was a week ago, so it was just like yesterday, and went through and determined, can the stuff we do now be done another way other than, RTM, so that we can all understand. And I'm gonna put it, I literally still have it in my chicken scratching. but I'm gonna put it in a chart and make sure everybody gets it. So we're trying to do, what you've said is exactly what we're trying to do, I think, is go through and look at RTM and make sure that, say we do go to open town meeting, can we still accomplish what we've always wanted to accomplish? And there are actually 3 things that came up, and we'll put this, I think we'll put this on the November agenda again, as well as looking at this. There were a couple or 3 things that we discovered as we were going through this, that do we even really need to do at all as a governing body? You know, so it's kind of, I think it was instructive for us to go through this exercise to realize, and it's on BCTV too. You know, there are things that we are learning that, you know, we've been doing something for all this time that we don't necessarily have to do. Even if we keep RTM, we don't have to do it.
Yeah, can I add to that? Especially if we keep RTM, we don't have to do it. Since one of the concerns about RTM has been the meetings last too long and there's minutia. Let's deal with the real, you know, more significant issues at RTM. And so I actually think, and I guess you should prepare a draft and then we should talk about it and see if, you know certainly have Bob validate whether that reflects accurately what you said or not. In the notes that I took, I think there are many more than just 2 or 3 items where we were questioning whether it's even necessary for us to do it. I think there is a volume of business, whether it's at RTM or at open town meeting, that following our historical pattern is more voluminous than necessary. That itself is a question for us to wrestle with that we haven't wrestled with yet, of which things would we suggest just are not necessary to be done in either form of meeting. But there are some, I think, and we have the ability to eliminate some of that feels like unnecessary business for that particular meeting. It also, I think, was significant, and I hear, again, like, I'm not sure that what I heard and wrote down necessarily matches up exactly to what you heard and wrote down, so we'll need to work through it.
Yeah, I want to go over that again at the next meeting.
Yeah, but I was satisfied by what Bob described, and we stopped several times to kind of pick at details of things and say, well, you're saying this, you know, I'm understanding that, is that right? And so we did it pretty thoroughly, and it was my impression that with 2 or 3 exceptions, there's probably 25 items on this list of individual actions that representative town meeting typically takes, and there were only 2 or 3 that couldn't be taken in an open town meeting. Almost the entire body of business that would go to one type of meeting could also go to the other type of meeting. So it feels to me like we've got 2 questions that are separate questions. There's what's the appropriate volume of business if we want to speak to that about like what should be on the warning or what shouldn't be on the warning. And I think there are some ways in which we should speak to that. But much more fundamentally, there's the question of what makes for better democracy? What's a better meeting, better forum for gathering the people of the town to make these decisions once the universe of decisions has been defined?
Does that sort of make sense, Melissa?
Yes,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Can I say one other thing? I would kind of like it to understand if there's a way to make continual improvements rather than waiting for another 15 years.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
Is there a way, I don't know if there's currently a way to continue to make improvements except for waiting another 15 years.
No.
In many cases, you know, organizations or whatever have ways of learning as you go. You know, let's say we do something, you make a change to RTM, and you know, we don't have a structure for saying, how's this working? Maybe part of what we decided is working, but part of it is not working quite the way we thought it would be. Let's kind of do something. We don't have that. We don't have that. The steering committee might have been, but definitely wasn't accomplishing that at all. Yeah.
And I think, and Bob could correct me here if I'm wrong, I think some of the things, and we're gonna go through this discussion point list in a few minutes, some of the things that are on the discussion point thing about, educating people in advance and all, or I'm looking at the thing here. Some of them aren't necessarily in the charter, so they could change based on, we could, whatever's in the, the length of the meeting is not addressed in the charter. What people have to know before the meeting isn't addressed in the charter. So there are things that the charter is in some ways broad enough that allows us to say, well, we don't want people to stand anymore. You know what I mean? And things like that. So there are ways to change whatever route we take based on how it's written in the charter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think they're two separate issues. One is what business is conducted at RTM and how people are elected. Or if we go to open town meeting, how's the agenda set? And those are separate from more procedural issues. And the procedural issues can be, I believe, if Bob Fisher could set me right, can be determined by RTM. And I know that the steering committee didn't work last time, but I've heard a lot of reasons why it didn't. And, that's one of the things that RTM or open town meeting or whatever route we go can determine a set size and people run for election for the steering committee, and they can make changes. So I think the procedural stuff is separate from other issues.
Bob's gonna give us advice.
I'm sorry,
Well,
I'm not very articulate
I'm
tonight.
hearing multiple different issues there, and as far as procedures for the meeting, under your addendum C or the rules for the meeting, that can be dealt with very separately, whether you're going to have a standing vote, a roll call vote, yay or nay, all of that sort of stuff. That to me is very separate. The rules for how many representatives and how you get elected and the petitions and the caucuses, that really needs to be, if you're going to keep representative town meetings, set forth in the charter. And that, to me, is a separate issue from the rules. Once you have that, then you have a certain number of people elected to be your representatives. They go to the meeting and they abide by the rules that you set over here. So I think those are two different things. Millicent asked, are there ways to update the charter more frequently than 15 years? And the short answer is yes. There are 4 ways under our existing...
That's not
That's
what
not
I'm
what you were
saying.
saying?
No.
Okay. I misheard you then.
No, you're saying, is there ways to sort of change RTM or whatever we choose based on, like we did it for a year and we found out that having people, I'm gonna use the standing and sitting things, that's all I can think of. Having people stand, the year we've tried everybody standing, that doesn't work. And we say, hey, we want them to sit next year, something like that.
That's a
Yeah.
reasonable example.
Yeah, just how it evolves naturally because we've done something.
Yeah, what's the means to learn at a rapid, a little more rapidly, and apply changes more rapidly than 15 years?
But it is that fluid.
Right.
It procedurally. So
That's
I'm
what I
going to
was
use
trying to
a
say.
variation on this hypothetical of standing and sitting. So many votes are taken by standing, right? Let's say that there's a concern raised that's not in the charter, right? So I want to differentiate between what Bob was about to reiterate to us about 4 different ways of changing the charter. So that if there is something that we recommend and that gets approved and that goes into the charter about town meeting, whether it be open or whether it be RTM, that is after a year or 2 or 5 experience with it feels like it's flawed, that can be changed. The charter can be changed either by convening another charter commission or in other ways without convening a charter commission in a more direct manner on a more particular thing. So So there's a mechanism for fixing a structural thing if we collectively, as a community, determine that that's necessary after a few years. This procedural question, it feels to me like we need to be really careful not to get too deep into that rabbit hole, because it's not a charter issue. We're not going to be saying in here whether you stand up or whether you raise your hand or whether you do some other method of voting. And if it continues to be the tradition that you stand up to cast your vote, and then for accessibility reasons or any other reasons there is pushback to that, and everybody from now on is going to be issued a paddle as you walk in, and it's like a auction instead, you know, then maybe we can switch to that. But those sorts of things can happen in a much more, a much less formal sort of way. I mean, that can be a thing that is able to be flexible without having to do something as rigorous as changing the charter.
Maya?
There was a charter amendment in between charter commissions because the 16-year-old vote was added.
There also was I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
There were petitions, it got on the ballot, we voted for it, and it went in the charter.
And that was by one method, and by a different method, there was one a few years earlier than that was actually brought forward by town staff and approved by town meeting that had to do with the procedures, the dates of by when certain things have to happen for the elections that related to implementing early voting. So those sorts of one-offs definitely can happen in between a full charter commission.
David?
District 9 again. Question, the addenda, are they like constitutional amendments, or are they not? This is a point of information.
Right. Addendum A is a legislative act from 1959 that outlines how representative town meeting works and how many representatives, etc. Addendum B are the rules of procedure, which it states they're recommended pursuant to the vote of town meeting members at the annual meeting in 1961 and subsequent appointment by the select board. Now, in those rules, of course, and we've employed this by the moderator's discretion, the last rule there says, on the motion of a town meeting member, any meeting may resolve itself into a committee of the whole meeting on any pending question. So when we've had procedural issues where we say, or the moderator says, hold on here, or somebody says, you know, maybe we should change this, based on that rule alone, you can essentially, it's like Robert's rules where you can have a vote to suspend the rules to create some other rules. So we've used that from time to time in order to move something forward at the meeting. But to answer your question, those are not, those are they're in here as addendums, or addenda, but the first one is an actual act of the legislature that just sits there as to how we have conducted and done our elections.
Okay. Thank you.
Tom?
Tom Osikowski, District 8. This is about getting maybe back to the question of putting on a ballot, asking if what the townspeople want, RTM or a different version. I'd suggest that maybe there's another option, which is to, change it to open town meeting, like you said, keep RTM, or have, by your recommendation, improved RTM. Right, because I heard a comment or two that, and then general head nods amongst the commission that you all have gotten the sense from a large swath and number of people in town that RTM isn't working as is. So just leaving it as existing or get rid of it and switch to open town meeting, it's not the only two options. Trying to fix it is totally an option.
Yep.
And then another thing I'd say is, and I think this is, bear with me, this is very much to the topic. You know that I bring up petitions a lot and powers of the people, that's been my focus. So when when the commission is considering just putting on the ballot, either asking the select board to, or whatever the process is, and just getting it on there, such a big change to government, to see if the townspeople want it, why don't we just use the process by which the townspeople exercise their power to put articles on the warnings, which is the petition? Is it because it takes 5% of the voters and that's too much? If it's too much and people can't find it hard to exercise their interests, then let's decrease that number. If it's not too much, then let's make it easy on you guys and don't even consider this. Just let the townspeople petition to put this on the warning.
I think that the issue with that we discussed a little bit last week is that, and like we've sort of brought up tonight, is that puts an additional burden on us to generate the votes for a petition. And we need an answer to this question in order to move forward. A lot of stuff is being tied up by this issue, and we can't do anything until we do that. And so taking even more time away from that to generate a petition, I think we'll just drag this process out even longer.
And for me, the how many of us? 6. I feel like we're here as a commission on behalf of the town. You know what I mean? And for us to have to personally go out and get 425 signatures or whatever it is, that's, you know what I mean? I'm not getting up here as a Cape citizen, you know. Oh, okay, that's what you meant.
Can I just clarify?
Oh, yeah.
Just really briefly. I mean,
yeah.
that is one way that you could go about it, and I recognize you guys have been elevated through the position to the commission. I'm just saying that if a change of getting rid of RTM and going to OTM is something that the people want,
Oh, okay,
then how come they haven't exercised that power?
right.
And from my vantage point, it's because it's hard to. And there's examples in our neighboring states where it's reasonable.
Yeah,
to
no,
do
I
so.
totally now
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, and I'll say what I really would like, we'll get back to like the question of the vote. I would really like to be able to have a advisory vote as well. You know, this is all about how we govern ourselves as a town, and I think it's really important that we ask the people in the town their position on that. And I totally agree, if we do it during the March election, people come out, you know, and if we were trying to have a special election, I would never say we should have a special election for this, because it would be us and like you folks and, you know, the people that happen to be watching BCTV at 2:00 in the morning and, you know, watch these meetings. But I think that, you know, we can do it within the March election. And I also think it's a healthy, I was having a conversation with David before, and you know, what's interesting for me is the arguments I've heard to keep town meeting, in my mind, are reasons why we shouldn't keep it. So it's been really fascinating for me to listen to some of the conversations that's happened. So I would love to have this conversation as an engaged community, to have this conversation, you know, because I'm this big believer now of that the community needs to be able to, the people who want to in the community. Some people, you know, I appreciate that some people, you know, we all have our different interests, and some of us are just globbed onto government. But I think it's really, really important in this day and age for our community to be afforded the conversation, since we're changing the charter, to have a vote, to make people think about things, you know, that some people out there might never have thought of. Oh, I never thought about doing it a different way, because the conversation has never been had. So that's why I personally think having a vote in March is a good idea, and it's a conversation that can, you know, involve everybody if they want to be involved. Peter, oh.
Thanks. I agree with that, and it'd be a little unorthodox to do this, but we could have something that resembled an informational meeting. but would be a more open public community forum prior to the vote, sometime in late February, to have the kind of discussion you're talking about, so that people who feel especially strongly and hopefully come also informed either by experience or otherwise having informed themselves, can have a back and forth around this, so that it informs then people's vote. BCTV can cover it, so there can be people who benefit from being involved in that conversation in the room or listening to that conversation in the room. There can be a broader group of people who can be alerted to the opportunity to watch that conversation before voting. So back to that communication piece, I think there are ways in which we can raise awareness about this. I think asking the question is important. I want to ask Bob a question. I'm afraid, I think I know the answer you're going to give, and I think I'm going to be disappointed about it. But Tom raises a good point that, and it is in fact the way we've been talking about it, but it's the way we've been talking about the substance of this question. It's not the way we've been talking about the potential of putting something on the ballot. So I appreciate you pointing out that there's, if we do discard Australian ballot, there's open town meeting, there's representative town meeting as it exists, and then there's modifying representative town meeting. I'm pretty confident that if we keep representative town meeting, this group of 6 people is going to recommend some modifications to it. But nevertheless, if we're going to go to the public and ask that question, there's 3 questions there. It's not a yes or no question. And so would it be possible, if it's advisory, not binding, for us to actually ask the question for people to select what is their preference among those 3, rather than us picking one and saying to the public, tell us yes or no whether you agree with that one?
If it's advisory, you can warn whatever advisory vote you want.
Actually,
I think it
just gave me a delightful answer.
Well, I just think it's
that'd be good.
How effective it is depends on what the question is.
It's absolutely, the question has to be asked very artfully, and then the 3 options could be listed. But I think being able to do that, being able to ask actually those 3 and have it be a preference vote, rather than an up or down on something that we presume to put before them, feels much more useful to us.
Right.
To me.
I would only
Ranked choice.
Yes, yes.
Ranked choice.
Could even be ranked choice. Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
If we did that, would we want to have the proposed charter section written out for each of the choices?
No, because that's,
I think that it needs to be a simple keep RTM or go to open town meeting, and then if it is keep RTM, then we can discuss what, if any, changes need to be made. But I think saying, do you want to keep it the way it is, or do you want to make some unknown changes, or do you want to go to open town meeting is too complicated, and most people are not going to educate themselves enough to understand the difference between those 2. And so I think it just needs to be RTM, and then from there, if that is the case, then we decide what needs to be changed, or we go to open town meeting.
Well, I think that we have to have some kind of public explanation of what the choices mean, whether it's 3 choices or 2 choices. We have to have some kind of written explanation from this commission, so people will know what they're voting on. I mean, whether it's a draft charter amendment either way, or it's some kind of written document, but we have to have something for the public. I don't think we can just say, choose.
I agree we need to pose the question, and that might be paragraphs, not a paragraph. Like, we might need to put out something that is, has more to it than what a question on the ballot would have. I don't disagree with that whatsoever. But the concern I have, Hannah, about if we just say open versus RTM, we know there's a whole lot of people who are have become sort of disaffected about RTM. And I'm worried that people who think RTM needs to be changed will interpret just this one versus that one question like their only option is to go, they don't want RTM to stay around the way it is, so their only option is to go to open, when in fact they might have preferred a modified meeting.
Yeah.
Which brings me back to ask a question actually of us, which is, if I haven't assumed too much, if in fact we might be collectively of the mind that we wouldn't want to support RTM just staying what it is, if we keep RTM instead of going to open town meeting, that we'd want to make some changes to it, then maybe it's as simple as actually still having two choices, but it's open town meeting versus modified representative town meeting.
Right.
Modifications to be determined.
Right.
But our document could describe, we see the need to update the way we hold a town meeting.
Yeah.
A choice could be to go and do it the way everybody else does it.
Yeah.
Another choice would be to take our unique system and improve it.
Yeah.
And then pose the two questions on the ballot.
Because even from, I don't want to say everybody, but the people who have come to this meeting who support RTM, support it, and again, I don't want to say everybody, because you don't ever say that, but the people that have come to this meeting who like RTM have suggested changes to it, you know? So in my mind, I believe that if RTM moves forward, it has to be made better. So there have to be changes to it to make it better based on what we've heard from the very people that have been coming to these meetings. I don't think there's anybody, or if there is, it's very few people who have come in here and said, RTM is so great, don't change a thing. And we have not heard anybody say that. So I think it is a choice between open town meeting and new and improved RTM. At least that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I think that's,
And one other concern I would have with saying keep it the way it is, even though it's an advisory vote, is then that might tie our hands to not moving into any changes to it.
Right. Because I think if you did keep it the way it is, most people would go, no, you know, so. I think we want to word this in a way, not so we get an outcome that any of us are particularly looking for. We
Right.
actually want to know what the people that live here want. So we do have to word it in a way that we allow people to understand what we're asking.
Question.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I can conceptualize it, but is it possible to rank choice this vote? I
Well,
can't really see it because it's like,
if there's only two, there isn't a way.
if there's only two.
but
Right.
if there are three,
Right.
But it's sort of like you do away with, the point is you do away with one if it doesn't get the majority and then go to the second.
Right.
So
I don't think we would.
you can't, it's not the kind of thing where you can divide up points and be like, you have 5 points, how do you divide them, amongst these options, so.
Well, and I think that
I think
argues.
there's a way to do a ranked choice voting.
But if we're talking now about doing RTM, a modified RTM and open, I think those are the two questions. There's not a third anymore.
If we agree
had
that we
three.
would only recommend RTM in our recommendations a year from now, that we would only recommend RTM in a modified form, and it seems as though we're agreeing here tonight that, I've been seeing nods. If we're ready to say, yes, that's true, we don't know exactly how we would change it, but we know it needs changing. If we're there, then I think we can keep this more simple and do
Two.
the binary question with a document that explains why we're bringing the binary question out to the community.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, in which
Then we
case we
wouldn't have to do
wouldn't have
ranked
ranked
choice.
choice.
Which is complicated to score as well,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so.
Yes.
Yeah, so
If
we
we
can
had
vote.
3 choices, we could do ranked choice.
Just for the fun.
But if we keep it as two choices, we don't have to make them.
That's right.
On the spoon.
I'm gonna go back to something very basic and then lead it up. It'll only take a minute. Democracy ruled by the people. How does that happen? Largely, we vote. To make that viable, we only allow one vote per person. But there's no point in having a vote if you just announce something and everybody votes without knowing what the situation is, what the vote's all about. It's just, so there's an assumption made that in order to have a legitimate vote, it has to be an informed vote. And that's key, and I'd like you to keep that in mind every time you think about bringing something before the people to make some decision or some judgment or say something about it. Will they have, and how will they have, the knowledge that they need to make the best decision?
Yeah, and I think we just talked about that, putting something together that explains what we're asking. And Peter, I think, made a good suggestion, which was to have informational, either one or more informational meetings prior to the vote where the public can come in and not just listen to us, but to share information about what they think of the proposals. So I think all of us are committed to making sure that before we're not just gonna put something on the ballot and let people think they know what they're talking about.
I understand that. I heard that. I guess I should go back, be a little bit more clear. One of the things that's been very challenging in a democracy, and there's a wonderful example out in Western New York many years ago. There was a big dam built. It was actually built in Pennsylvania, but most of what got flooded was New York. What got flooded was the Seneca Reservation. And they had, when that was proposed, the Senecas showed them somewhere else that dam could be built for much less money, much easier, and actually be more effective. But that was rejected because that would have meant that mostly white-owned land would be submerged. Well, ultimately it came to a decision, and the alternative that had been provided that would have been more effective was never even proposed. So the people making the decision didn't even know that there was an alternative, a viable alternative. And so now to bring that forward, I worry, I have this concern that if you're planning to put 3 proposals out, yes, no, or somewhere in between, and the somewhere in between, of course, could have 1,000 different shapes. What if there's a 4th? What if there's a 5th? And I'd like... What you're into here is very complex decision making, and I would recommend that you actually talk about finding a 7th skilled person, non-voting person, to help you shape this discussion, because I feel like you're trying to make a decision and there's too much stuff being missed, and not by any nefarious or ill intentions at all, but you just don't see it. And I think there's a lot more that you can do that you're not doing.
Peter.
I want to repeat something multiple of us have said, and I want to I disagree, Steve, and I want to disagree respectfully. I appreciate particularly the way you spoke about democracy and the importance of informed votes. But on this question of how complicated it is, this body of work overall surely is very complicated, and the work that we've done to get ourselves to this point in our decision making about town meeting has been complicated. I think the place we've arrived at, in part from the discussion this evening and in part from all the other work we've done up to this point, is actually leaving us in a pretty good, clean, clear place that I think is going to be really useful, which is It's not where's the third and fourth and fifth options that we might not be adequately thinking about, because those are all embedded in this option of a modified RTM. We can have open town meeting, which is a well-established system that exists all around us. Or we could have a modification, hopefully an improvement, of the system that has been unique to Brattleboro in Vermont. We know that in Massachusetts and elsewhere there are other examples of how RTM works. But the question for the people will actually be a nice clean question of, do we switch to the standard in Vermont of an open town meeting, or do we want to retain RTM and improve it? And we will write a document that frames that question and explains why we're asking it. And we'll have some public meetings where people can have healthy conversations around, I think about it this way, I think about it that way. BCTV will record it. They'll be as informed an electorate as we know how to create. There'll probably be some people from the community who push one way or the other with op-eds and through other political action. And so that's how we do it. That's how we get to an informed vote, as you were describing in the democracy. So it feels to me actually like, 45 minutes ago, I wasn't very optimistic we'd land in such a good, clear place, but I'm feeling really good about it now, that if the question is open town meeting versus modified RTM, and we explain adequately the framing of the question, and that there's going to be more work to do to decide just how RTM gets modified, if that's the choice, and that the people will again weigh in on our recommendations about how RTM would be modified, I feel like that's a path forward that even voters who are less interested in town government but who do care to show up and vote will be able to understand what the question is.
Hannah?
And I think that this will generate some interest such that whatever decision ends up being made, people might get more involved in what those changes look like.
Right.
Because they will have voted and they will have had some input, and then that will maybe encourage more people to come and say, here's what I think could be improved about RTM, or here's how I think we should handle open town meeting. I think that it once we have that, because we have had a lot of discussions about things that people think could be improved through RTM, or things that could be done by Australia Ballot. We've had all of these conversations, but until we know that binary, we can't even really appreciate those conversations, because it's like, why are we even talking about this if we're not gonna keep the system where we are gonna, we need to resolve this.
David, and then Greg Ellison.
David Lovelock, District 9. If in fact you're going toward advisory, which is I think what you're saying, in the event there's a vote for a revised RTM, modified RTM, and in the process of getting there, or even after that vote, there's an outcry of, you've missed another option to submerge the town, for example, which would solve all our problems. You could still do that in the Charter Commission.
Right.
That's right.
Because this is advisory
That's right.
only.
So yeah, I think at this point, I'm more familiar with the things that people say are wrong with the current RTM and maybe some ideas for suggestions for changes. I was wondering if it's possible for you to summarize here, like what you have heard about both ideas, a modified representative version versus a completely open, about which one is. What are the reasons for that would be make this the best democracy possible? What are the positive reasons that you could summarize for both of those ideas? Can you summarize that?
Working on this for a year and a half, that we've had a lot of conversations about this. I don't think any of us really want to express a strong opinion one way or the other.
I don't mean your opinion. I'm not looking for an opinion. I'm looking for.
I'll offer an example, but I want to be really clear that it's just an example. If the chair is even willing to entertain an example.
I was going to say something after you. You go.
Okay. I mean, I think there's great risk, Millicent. Actually, first I'd like to say two quick things. I talk a lot in these meetings. I apologize for that. But one thing I think is really cool and we should take note of is in most meetings of public bodies, the public is encouraged to get up and offer your thoughts to us, but the conversation we have is with us, and pretty explicitly with us. And there are times when in meetings it's proper because there's business to be conducted that doesn't have as long a timeline as we do, where just there's a necessity of saying, thank you, we've heard from the public, but now we're gonna have our conversation, we're gonna make a decision. And there's some alienation that sometimes occurs in that moment that we've really strived not to. We haven't had as much public participation as we would have loved to have had, but moments like what's happening right now are substantive conversations that we're having together in this room that I think is important to note as being so substantively different than, when DRB meets or the select board meets or other kinds of meetings like that. I think it's proper that it be different. I think it is different. So I want to just make note of that, and I hope that people are appreciating that the dialogue we're having is, I think, good and useful and unusual for a public body. Sorry for my soapbox. But answer to your question is, I think there's danger in us trying to summarize, here are the reasons why you might go for open, here are the reasons why you might go for representative town meeting, because we'd be shooting from the hip. I don't think even our framing document ought to offer all of those. We could, between us, come up with, probably a dozen or more for each column, and we would miss some, and I think it would be a mistake. I think the universe of those items on each of those two lists ought to come from the public, and some of us as we choose to participate in it and whatever, but not be brought from us to you. One thing. Second thing is an example of this, just so you can have a feel for it. It's just one isolated example. Is we've received a recommendation that we should have fewer members of representative town meeting, that will make some competition in the election process and make the individual members who are elected feel more responsible to the people of the community. And I'm not speaking whether I think that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it's interesting to me that idea has been brought to us as a way to improve democracy, that we're going to have fewer people get to participate in the actual meeting. And so I struggle with that. I haven't landed in a place, but I'm struggling with it. How is that going to improve? I get how it's going to make for a contested election. I get why a contested election is a healthy thing. And I'm not sure it's a good thing for us to have fewer members of representative town meeting. In contrast, open town meeting says, if you're interested and available on the day of the meeting, come on out. And you're a registered voter. Although probably with our registration laws, you could register that morning and come into the meeting. Mm-hmm. So.
And I think, for me, Millicent, if we do this vote, because nobody said no, we'll have these public forums. And I think the way I see it is, as a commission, we can provide factual information, like this chart. I keep referring to the good chart. We can provide the factual information to the public going, here's what will happen just structurally at an RTM or an open RTM. We can provide that stuff, but I don't see any of us, as what Peter just said, going, well, this is the good, this is the, because I don't think that's our role. And that's why I've found this conversation when the public talks to us about this really fascinating, because in many ways, I'll use the same example Peter has, and you struggle with, well, having less people, is that really, the way we should be going? But, so I have found the whole conversation fascinating, because things that are used to say this is a good thing to do for RTM, to me is like, really? But, that's what I think we should have that conversation in a room as a whole bunch of people, because you think of stuff that you never have thought of. I have thought of things that, for the first time, because I've listened to people in the public say them. So I think our role is really just to say, here's what we're grappling with, here's the two options we're giving you, and here's some factual information, and then you folks discuss it amongst yourselves, and then go vote. At least that's where I'm coming down on this. So it's all up to you, Millicent, at the public forums. So, do we want to make a decision right now how we want to proceed? I think we've got Bob here if we have any last minute questions. But I think the issue for us now is how do we want to proceed? Do we want to go forward with a public vote? If we want to go forward with a public vote, do we want to ask the select board to put it as an advisory vote on the March 2025 ballot? And do we want to do it as we discussed? Putting two things up. We can do it yeah.
Can I ask a
Oh,
question?
yeah.
If the vote is in March,
Mhm.
what does that do to your timeline?
It's perfect. We've always had a vote in March on our timeline.
Right.
I was just looking it up. Yeah, we've always had a vote in March on our timeline, and we can still get it all done by the end of the year, and end of next year. Because what our goal right now is just to continue getting everything else humanly possible done, which we're sort of working our way through, so that we've made, hopefully, I don't want to say by the end of this year, but our goal is to get everything humanly possible done by the end of next year. So this is like the last thing hanging out there that's actually of consequence. So it doesn't mess us up at all, because it's always been factored in that we would ask a question
Yeah,
in
I
March.
wanted you to say that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking. Oh, yeah, okay. So the question Maya just asked is, it does not change our timeline. It doesn't screw us up.
Right.
Because we've been trying, our goal is to get this to the legislature, so they can,
December 2025.
2025, which seems like forever from now. But in order to do that, we have to do certain things. But having a vote in March on this question does in no way mess us up to we will still be able to get this to the legislature for their consideration in January of 2026.
And have had public meetings.
Yeah.
And
And a special
And a
RTM.
special RTM.
Yeah.
We'll do everything required by law.
Yeah.
And what our timeline was to, in June, and we got this from Bob, start having the, in June 2025, have the public meeting, and then do a special RTM in September 2025. So we actually have wiggle room there.
Yeah.
So,
may I make a motion?
oh, yes.
I'd like to make a motion that we ask the select board to put on the ballot for March 2025 a non-binding question to the voters of a preference for open town meeting or a modified RTM. Period. And may I speak to the motion?
Okay, so your motion is to ask the select board to put on the ballot for March 2025 a non-binding question to the voters of preference of open town meeting or modified RTM.
Yeah,
Something
so
like-
I think, may I speak to it?
Oh, yeah.
I think I stopped there because I don't want to get the motion all convoluted with our intention of how we intend to roll it forward.
Right.
So I think that's what we intend to do based on the conversation we've had tonight. I personally believe that's what we should do, so I made the motion. I'd like to also say, just so that it's clear, and either we agree to this or we disagree about it and tweak it, and for those who have encouraged us to proceed in a certain manner, that they can be reassured that we would, that our intention will be to take this as soon as possible to the select board.
Mhm.
So we understand whether or not they agree that this is a good path to follow.
Right.
And if they do, we then will diligently work to prepare the document that's going to frame the question.
Yeah.
And we would eventually, as part of this process, also hold one or more public forums, a public forum or public forums to have discussion before the vote occurs.
Yeah.
And I think it's important also to note that, when we bring it to the select board, if we get additional guidance from Bob, if we get some guidance from Hillary, the language, we ought to be content that the language posed this question, and that we're going to have control over the framing document. The words might be slightly different
Right.
than what I have said tonight, and we should just acknowledge that might be a good and proper thing to do to get it properly in front of the voters.
Spoon.
By putting just two choices, you're implying that a decision's already been reached. I would recommend that there be a third line on that ballot. Two could be your picks, and a third is asking for the voters' pick. So that there may be people who might want to write in, I like it the way it is, or none of the above, or whatever else they might think of. But if you're going to say it's either this or that, I don't know. I'm not sure I would want to vote.
I think we need an answer to a question, in my opinion, because we're gonna have to recommend charter, we're gonna make recommendations to RTM about how to change the charter, and we need solid, actual information about this. So to me, we haven't voted on it yet, so somebody can amend the motion, but to me, we gotta ask the question that we know we want answered, which is, do you want a modified RTM or do you want an open RTM? I mean, to me, that's the question we're trying to get the answer to.
And we already had discussion earlier this evening. We did, not just this commission, but we in the room had conversation earlier this evening that was really helpful and constructive around when we were leaning towards three questions that would have been more, would have allowed a more, when we were leaning towards three questions and concerned about the complexity of that, we landed on this place because the modified representative town meeting actually encompasses such a broad array of options that we're not defining, and we'll be clear in our document that frames the question. We've heard lots of input about concerns about representative town meeting. There have been suggestions made about how to improve it. We have some ideas about how to improve it. None of that has been finalized because we need to have some understanding from the public about whether going through that kind of a process is even worthwhile, because if the public chooses open, they've chosen open. But if they choose representative and want it improved, then we will do that work and bring that forward to the public. So framing it as a binary question for March of 2025 in no way restricts the ability of the public to have impact on the ultimate recommendation.
Does anyone else on the commission have any thoughts on this, or do you want to take a vote?
To be clear, it is a non-binding
Correct. Okay, so Peter's made a motion to ask the select board to put on the ballot for March 2025 a non-binding question to voters of preference for an open town meeting or modified representative town meeting. Sorry, in my chicken scratch. All those in favor of Peter's motion say aye. Aye. Motion carries 6-0. Okay, so I think we'll probably work with Patrick and Bob to figure out when we can, I know the select board's slammed, but if we can even have like 15 minutes on a meeting.
So I was going to ask you after the meeting, would you like to reach out to the agenda setting committee, or I staff the agenda setting committee and would,
Yeah,
you know.
I don't want to burden you, but if you're going to talk to them anyway, can you?
Okay. And should the request essentially be, we'd like to get this, on your agenda as soon as possible. And if they say, okay, but, can you wait 2 meetings?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think what would be great is if we could know by the end of the year, because if we're going to go for this March 5th, well, actually, as soon as we can.
Yeah, it's got to get on the ballot, so it has to happen prior to, end of January.
Yeah, and we want to be able to have our, at least one info meeting.
Yep.
And we're gonna want to frame the question we're asking. So if the sooner we know from the select board, this is a go,
Yep.
it gives us the opportunity to do all the work we need to do to make sure the public is informed.
Yep.
So, and if we tell them, it'd just be like 10 minutes.
Honestly, it could be 10 minutes, you can want it to be 10 minutes, it could be an hour.
Yeah.
I don't think
Is
it's
it-
gonna be 10 minutes, Katie.
This is not the complicated part. The complicated part comes after.
I don't.
I saw you diligently writing down the motion that
Yeah.
Peter made.
I'll send it
Can
to
you
you.
either send that to me or hand it to me after the meeting?
Yeah,
Perfect.
I'll get it to you. And again, well, we can talk about this, because when we talk about with the select board, we'll have some input from Bob about maybe how to say it even in a better way, but this is what we're going for.
Yeah.
So I'll make sure you both have it. Okay, so that's a good next step. Does everyone feel good about that next step? Okay. I think, well, that was our big thing.
Yeah, we don't need to do
No.
this to the.
No, that was our big thing, and I think the next meeting, I just want to confirm this with everybody, and then I'll go over some thoughts about the next meeting really quickly. The next meeting, I believe, is November 7th. Is that when we have it on our calendar?
Not the 21st?
Next week.
No, well,
Is it
No.
November 7th?
It's November.
It's definitely in November.
I wrote it down.
Yeah, it's November 7th.
Yeah, so does that still work with everybody? Yeah, November 7th. And what I thought we would do, and you can say we don't want to, but I think we need to, I'm gonna clean up this comparison chart that we did. You know, so that we can all look at that again. And I'll send it to Bob too, so you make sure, like, yeah, this is what I said, Kate, and I'll send it to everybody here to go, yeah, that's what so we'll get it all ready so that on November 7th, we can make sure the public has it. But then we can still, there's other items that we have to go through, to keep us moving forward.
On other topics
Yeah.
besides town meeting.
Yeah, on
Correct.
other topics. And
Yeah.
one of them is David Minor's here, and I talked to him last night. We're gonna get together about the human services stuff. So, we'll put, we'll do a little bit of RTM stuff. Patrick may or may not have an update for us by November 7th, when we can go to the select board. And then we'll keep moving forward with the other things that are still left on our
Yes.
agenda.
We have, that would include, the select board procedure language,
Oh, yeah, he has that
and
too.
the, ethics provision, and, recall.
Yeah, and Peter you were drafting one of those.
Yes.
Was it recall?
I've got notes from last
Yeah.
time. I owe some language to Hannah so that Hannah can wrap some fuller language around it. And I'll
did they discuss
take care of that.
Yeah, and
Next
if
of
you
the
have that for the November
thing that
7th
Peter
meeting,
read?
that'd be great. If not, of course, we'll maybe.
Can I just ask us, since we don't have minutes, we voted to the language on the select board election, right?
Yes.
The
Yes.
change from 60 to 90 days.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what's left is the procedure language and
It's
the
ethics and recall.
recall.
Yeah, the other ones we voted on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there'll be other things
Yeah,
that will come up.
with a giant list. And my plan is, now that I have more than a week, my plan is to come back with I have that spreadsheet of all this stuff. And I wanna update the spreadsheet so we can all look at it. Because we've been keeping a running giant list of all the stuff we talk about. And then when I'm organized enough, I go through and say we did it or we didn't. So we're gonna get a big spreadsheet out again, so everybody can have an idea, not just us, but the public, on where we are on some of this stuff.
We've been really focused on this major question for the last few times
Yeah.
and a few related things along the way. But I think that it is super important as you bring us back to completing those items that were close but not finished,
Yeah.
that we all take inventory of like,
Yes.
what else haven't we given or sufficient attention to that we need to make time for?
Yeah, and I'll get that to everybody before the November 7th meeting, so we're not looking at it for the first time then.
Can I make a request?
Oh, yeah.
Patrick, can you make sure that Seth or whoever posts the stuff on the Charter Commission website,
Like the backup
the
stuff.
backup stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
Because,
Apparently there's been a little bit of breakdown in how that gets there, but,
yeah, because I have
there's
to
a
send
sequence
some
of people
stuff.
that need to be organized and notified, and I'll do my best to organize and notify them.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I make a motion to adjourn?
Yes, Maya makes a motion to adjourn, and so we'll be back on November 7th. Any, all those in favor?
All right.
6-0, we adjourn.